Shadywood Apartments is a long, narrow building that sits at the top of a steep incline, overlooking a body of water called Ambassador's Lake. There's a legend about the lake relating to the founders of the town meeting by the shore, settled new land or something. It's a dry tale, not worth the effort of retelling. Looking out from my balcony, I'm graced with a clear view of the lake and surroundings. There's a paved trail that goes all the way around the lake. Wooden park benches dotting its circumference. Families, friends, and lovers come by the lake just about every day. Observing them has become something of a hobby of mine. I recognize the familiar faces when I can manage to see their face well enough from 100 or more yards out. Of course, there was one man whose face I never saw, but I spotted him almost every day. Wore a tan fishing cap, cargo pants to match, with a red flannel shirt between. He looked like an angler, except I never saw him with a rod, or even so much as looking in the direction of the lake. Instead, he would just walk around the trail, briefly chatting with those he'd passed, and otherwise keeping to himself. If I had written about this lake and its visitors a week ago, that paragraph would likely have been the end of his involvement. Fortunately, I have this tale to tell. It was only about 4 days ago that the police came to my house. They were going door to door to my complex, and I couldn't make out a brief, indistinct conversation coming from the apartment beside me. If I'd wanted to, I could have heard the whole thing. These walls have mouths, and if you're willing to listen, you can experience a whole other life in Leo of your own. I tried to respect the privacy of my neighbors a little more than that, though. Knowing they were inevitably coming to my door, I was prepped and ready by the time the knocks finally came. I opened the door and greeted them with a warm smile. After a brief round of introductions, one of the officers got straight to the point, asking me,
"Do you recognize the name Helen Carmine?"
I said I didn't, and they produced a photograph. Holding it out for me to take, it was of Ambassador Lake, a surrounding park. The focus of the image was a boy and a girl, each very young, standing beside one another and posing for the camera. In the background were a dozen more people engaging in a standard park fare. The officer indicated a bench just above the young boy's head, quite a distance away. Two people sat on the bench, seemingly engaged in a conversation.
"This is the last time anyone saw her alive. Do you recognize her or the man sitting with her?"
Actually, I do, kind of. Not her, but the man. Unmistakably, it was the man with the flannel shirt. I explained to them what I knew and that he had visited the lake often. To meet him, they likely just needed to wait there for a day, 2 at the most. They thanked me for my time and gave me a card to call in case I remembered anything else and visit the next apartment. I thought about what they told me and tried to imagine the flannel shirt man as anything other than a harmless old fisherman reliving his past via proximity to water. Police officers had warned me to be wary of him, that he may be dangerous. Finding it hard to believe, I told myself over and over, it's never the ones you think it will be. Night falls quickly around here, as dark and foreboding as the days are bright and warm. I sat at my computer, immersed in the cool glow of the monitor, when it occurred to me that the rest of my apartment was pitch black. I got up and moved around across the living room, heading to the light switch by the front door. But just as I was about to flip it, I heard a knock at the door to the apartment beside me. I paused and glanced at the clock below my TV. 12:28, it read. It seemed strange for me that the police would come around at such a late hour. Perhaps they learned something new and significant. Perhaps the neighborhood remembered something that called for them to return. Whatever the reason, when a response didn't come after a few seconds, the footsteps became more towards my door. I softly gripped the doorknob and leaned forward to peer through the peephole. This later action was taken on instinct, and if I had really thought about it, I likely wouldn't have bothered. I don't like to think about what might have happened if I had looked through the peephole first. Before my door stood the man in a fishing cap, a flannel shirt, and cargo shorts. Had that been the end of it, I still may not have been as wary as I was. No. What kept my door closed and froze the rest of my body in the process was the rest of his appearance. He was, in a word, dry. What I could see of his pale skin was ashen, looking as though it may flake off at the slightest touch. The brim of his fishing cap came down over his face and obscured his eyes, but his lips were plain to see, chapped and split, with jagged bolts of crimson highlighted against the pink-white coloration. White, wispy hair dangled on either side of his head out from beneath his cap. The man raised his fist and knocked on the door, on my door, 3 times. I was a statue, glued to the peephole, for fear that it may have noticed the flicker of light through the lens changing. Something deep inside me told me that I didn't need to hear anything he had to say, and the best course of action was just to wait, let him go on his way. So he did. After what couldn't have been more than a handful of seconds, the man in the flannel shirt turned and moved on, continuing down the row of apartments and stopping at the door of my neighbor on the other side.
Just a minute,
came the reply from an obviously agitated woman. As uncomfortable as I was with the man's presence, I was just as curious as to what he wanted of us. Against my better judgment, as well as principle 2 of mine, I sat up to the wall and pressed my ear against it, listening intently.
What do you... Jesus Christ!
The neighbor exclaimed.
Do you need help?
The reply came in a voice so dry and dusty it hurt my own throat to hear.
Do you have some water?
The man asked. A pang of guilt struck through me. He was obviously dehydrated, and I left him locked outside to die. What kind of monster was I? I heard the sound of the chain lock unlatching, followed by the door closing, the two of them making their way to the kitchen. She moved in quick, long steps, while his gait was a low tempo shuffle, sliding across his apartment as she poured him a glass of water.
You look like you're gonna need a lot.
She said.
Drink this. I'll get you another glass.
Don't bother,
came the low rasp of response.
It won't do any good.
A silence fell over the apartment. I'd heard about that, about how by the time you realize you're actually dying of dehydration, it may be too late to do anything about it. I wasn't sure how true that was, but it seemed odd that the man had so readily accepted his fate.
That's ridiculous. Come on, drink.
Have you heard the tale of the dry man?
He asked her, another pause.
No, I haven't, but...
The way it was told to me was this. Long ago, 100 years or more, society wasn't quite like what it is today. Less civilized, brutal.
He stopped briefly, and I heard the sounds of a chair being dragged across the floor.
Time was you could hang a man just because you had a grudge and more friends than he. Simpler in a way, harder in a lot more. Back then there was a fellow by the last name of Keene. First name, well, I can't quite remember his first name. Doesn't much matter. A man lives on by his actions more than his name. Keene was a drunk by nature, and a loud one at that. In and out of his cell, Keene was, like it was his home away from home.
The faucet from their apartment turned on again, and the sound of glass being filled with water followed. Funny, I thought. I haven't even heard him stop for a drink yet.
One day, the sheriff gets it into his head that he's gonna teach Keene a lesson. You like the drink so much, he says. That's all you'll get to drink. Keeps Keene in his cell unlawfully, though not against the wishes of the town, and feeds him nothing but bread and beer, with some game for dinner.
A strange, dry staccato issued from the apartment. It was a few moments before I could realize it was the man's laughter.
I guess the sheriff figured he'd better feed Keene well, even if he doesn't treat him right.
The faucet turned on again. Another glass was poured. My own mouth felt a little dry, but I chalked it up a sympathetic reaction.
Man cannot live on beer and bread alone. Now, even if he was raised on the bottle. The sheriff has this big barrel of water right beside his desk that he drinks from every day, right in front of Keene. The drunk begs and pleads, says he'll never touch another drop of alcohol in his life. A lie both of them knew, but the sheriff is stalwart, refuses to let Keene out, and just keeps drinking that water in front of him day after day. 2 weeks of this go by until it seems the sheriff won't ever let Keen out. So the drunk, dehydrated, trying man stops bleeding. That night when the sheriff and Keen are having their respective dinners, the sheriff helping himself to as much water as he could guzzle, Keen starts telling him what it's like. Doesn't know why, really, but something possessed him to describe the way the air burned his throat on the way out and stung coming back in. He talks about his tongue, dry as a forgotten sponge, just sitting in his mouth, scraping against his cheeks and his teeth and his gums. Can't get it comfortable no matter where he puts it. Says he's thought about chewing it off just to give it somewhere else to be.
Faucet was running non-stop at this point, but I could still clearly hear the man's voice over the sound of water.
The sheriff, wouldn't you know it, starts drinking more water right in front of Keen. Ladle after ladle he scoops into his tin cup, then directly into his mouth, until soon the ladle isn't enough. The sheriff bends over the barrel and just starts lapping out of it like a dog, then sticks his face in and starts gulping it down. Mouthful after mouthful of water, and all of this right in front of a man dying of dehydration.
He laughed that harsh, awful laugh again.
Spiteful, petty is what it was. But there he goes, sticking his head further and further into the barrel until he just stops, slumps down over the edge of the barrel, gone limp.
What the fuck?
That woman said in a breathless voice, as though she was responding to something else entirely. Her voice startled me. I'd almost forgotten she was in the apartment, and it felt as though the man was talking directly to me. I was parched, but I stayed where I was. I didn't want to miss a word of the man said.
Keen gets out of his cell a little while later when the deputy comes by and sees what happened. Couldn't have been Keen. Man's as shriveled as a prune. Even if he wasn't locked in a cell, he couldn't have held the sheriff's head under like that. With nothing to hold him on, Keen walks free. And then he just walks. Goes wherever his feet take him. Soon after, the rumors start spreading. Stories of the dry man. A withered wight with nothing but his tale of torture to tell. Cursed to watch others gorge themselves on the one thing he wants most, but can't ever have.
God forgive me.
Anyway,
He grunted, sliding his chair across the floor again.
I've taken up enough of your time. Thanks for letting an old man share his story.
His short shuffle carried him to the front door despite the absence of any meaningful response from his host. The door opened, closed. Just like that, there was silence again, save for the ever-running faucet in the next door. Quickly, I made my way to the front door, peering out a peephole for another glimpse of the man. He was gone, feeling more than a little tired, likely coming down off that odd primal adrenaline rush. Made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water before bed, drinking it down more quickly and readily than I recall ever had done in the past. I made myself another to the chase before heading to bed, expecting the water to slake my thirst sometime in the night. Upon awakening, I discovered I had not. I didn't even have to use the restroom. I just wanted more water. In my PJs, I stumbled back to the kitchen, pouring myself another glass, when the red and blue flashes coming through my front curtain distracted me. As I pierced together in the next 10 or 20 minutes, my next door neighbor had, at least some point in the night, called 911 immediately for drowning in her own bathtub. I thought some immediately went to the story from the night before of the sheriff drowning himself in a barrel of water. I took a drink from my glass. Scanning the crowd of police officers, EMTs, I spotted a familiar face. One of the two who had visited me the day prior was taking a statement from another man who lived in my building. I made my way into his line of sight, but as obtrusively as possible, and signaled him to speak with me when he got the chance. He nodded his understanding, and a short time later met up with me in front of my apartment.
Did you see or hear anything?
He asked as he approached. I nodded and grunted through a mouthful of water, swallowing. Yeah, the man you were looking for with the flannel shirt. I saw him last night. He knocked on my door, and when I didn't answer, he went to hers. I know I shouldn't have, but I listened through the wall. I told him the story of Keen, the sheriff, and the dry man, in much the same way as I described it to you. As I had no reason to suspect that the flannel man had done anything. It sounded like he left before going anywhere other than her living room. But I admitted to falling asleep shortly thereafter. The officer thanked me, and I went back inside, setting the most empty glass down on the counter. An hour later, that officer drowned himself in Ambassador Lake in front of all of his friends and colleagues. Nobody knew what to do. Several people had tried to help him and tried to go to him and pulled him ashore, but he brandished his gun at anyone who got close, even as he dunked his head underwater, taking deep, obvious breaths of it, like he was trying to fill every part of himself from the lake. It was only when his body went limp that anyone felt brave enough to approach. But of course, by then, it was too late. I watched the whole scene unfold with morbid fascination. Something about it satisfied me. Kept me looking down on it as played out long. If I had felt I should have turned away. I wasn't happy that the man was dead. I certainly had nothing against police officers in general, but the event fulfilled me, made me feel as though I could keep going. Perhaps I reasoned it was one of those spiritual concepts. One life ends, another truly begins. An impromptu quarantine was placed around Ambassador Lake, and the water in our building was shut off for fear of contaminants. Speculation grew like weeds, and many Shadywood residents relocated elsewhere to hotels or with family in the city. I stayed right where I was. This was my home after all. I looked out on the lake that night. The quarantine was still in effect, though I doubted how effective a strip of yellow tape around the lake really was. I tried to imagine myself in the position of that officer, taking heavy lungfuls of water without even flinching. The act seemed abhorrent, and I almost turned away in disgust, until I noticed him. The man in the flannel shirt walked at his lazy zigzag down to the path that surrounded the lake. His eyes wandered back and forth as if he was just another park goer, taking in the sights. Never mind that it was nearly midnight. I studied him intently, and thought occurred to me, a crazy, ridiculous thought. Was that the dry man? It made sense, didn't it? He told the story to my neighbor, and she drowned herself in a tub before dawn. His appearance, his dry, chapped, ashen appearance, lent more credibility to the theory than I was comfortable with. If I assumed that a person could exist with the ability to talk to someone into drowning themselves, and that this person was known as the dry man, well, the more I thought about it, the more obvious, far-fetched it seemed. I was so lost in thought, I didn't notice for a long while that the man in the flannel shirt had stopped moving. Only several seconds after noticing it, that I made another discovery. He was staring directly back at me. Me, the occupant of the apartment he had visited the night before, the home I had led him to believe was vacant. Instantly, I fell to the floor. It was childish, yes, but I couldn't think of a quicker way to break line of sight. I sat there with my back to the wall, praying he hadn't seen me. There was nothing I wanted less than a conversation with that man. Knock, knock, knock. Too fast. That was way too fast. It was impossible that he'd run up the slope, found my door, and knocked in that brief amount of time, wasn't it? Did that mean it wasn't him? Who else would knock on my door 3 times in the middle of the night? The silhouette of a man moved in front of my curtains, backlit by the street lamps outside. He was clearly facing into the apartment, swaying gently back and forth. I held my hands over my mouth, barely even breathing through my nostrils. Every light in my small home was on. If I moved, I had almost certainly gave myself away. Not that I had done that already. The black shape stood there, as if staring at me. I stared right back. Neither of us moved, save for its gentle swaying. The rhythmic rocking back and forth, I focused on that, concentrated on the left and right, side to side like a lazy human metronome. For what felt like hours, I watched him, waiting for him to leave, or to come back to my door and knock again, or do anything other than stay and sway. I woke in the late morning, startled to my feet a moment after regaining my senses. The silhouette at my window was gone, and after a brief, hasty search of my apartment, I confirmed that I was still alone. I went to the kitchen, grabbing a glass, holding it under the faucet before turning the knob. Right. Empty-handed, I went back to my laptop and tried my best to go about my day. I forced myself not to think about the encounter from last night, or the fact that I felt as though I was living in slum conditions, with officials in various suits coming and going from apartment to apartment. They came once to my door, but after confirming my water was turned off and a brief physical inspection, they mostly left me alone. The majority of the attention was concentrated on my neighbor's home, more troublesome than the commotion. However, was my durst when they dropped to the last time department management had given me several bottles of confirmed clean water. I went through all 5 in 2 hours, and I still felt like I was running a marathon in a desert. My lips smacked whenever I opened them, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. It was for several seconds before I had forcibly peeled it away. It was a strange combination of feelings, my skin registering a comfortable 72 degrees when the inside of my mouth had me convinced I must have been licking sand. I stared out at the lake again, the wide, blue lake full of water. The heat in the mouth seemed ratcheted up, as if just looking at it was making what little must have remained in my mouth evaporate away. The quarantine was just a strip of tape. I watched the man drown himself. I wouldn't drown myself. Just needed a drink. Before I knew it, I was sliding down the slope behind my home. There was a set of stairs a little further than I'd gone, but it would have been a waste of time. Time I could have spent getting closer to the water. Getting into the water. Getting the water in me. I jogged up to the bank of the lake, slipping on the police tape. Distantly, I heard someone yelling at me to stop. They didn't understand. I'd be right back out in just a second and take my slap on the wrist. This was a matter of life and death. Immersing my head in the soft, cool water of the lake was the single greatest moment of my life. I let it flood into every orifice of my head, surrounding myself in the cool refreshment and nourishment I so desperately craved. I took in gulp after gulp, practically sobbing into the water in relief. I almost died out there in the heat under the oppressive sun, but now I would live. I was so grateful just to be alive. The bliss lasted only a moment before several pairs of meaty hands grabbed me, pulling me away from the water. I was dragged onto the trail around the lake, kicking and spluttering the entire time. Water flowed out of me in great heaps as I bitterly sucked in the dry air, feeling lacerate the roof of my mouth in disabling streaks. My next physical examination was much more thorough. They confirmed that I had been given water, but they didn't believe I'd actually drank any of it. There was no urine in my unflushable toilet, and my body showed signs of extensive dehydration, signs which they admitted should have been discovered during the morning checkup. They gave me a pallet of bottled water and ushered me into my room. I finished the water in a half hour, and I needed more. Another check outside confirmed my fears. There were guards posted around the lake now, moving in tight patrols from my vantage point. I couldn't see any breaks in their formation, but I had to hold out hope that they would be. I had to get back to the lake, back to that sweet sensation I had tasted too briefly. Resolving myself to go outside and watch from a closer, more actionable position, I discovered something else. There was a guard posted at my door, a gorilla of a man that took up nearly the entire passageway. He turned to face me when I opened it.
Going out?
He asked, and I laughed and glanced past him. Several people in the lab coats looked our way with worried expressions. Yeah, are you trying to stop me? I was only half joking.
We're doing everything we can to resolve the situation.
Translation? Yes, I am. This is ridiculous. Get out of my way. I tried to push past him, but he just stood there, arms crossed, barring a passage.
We'll let you know as soon as the situation is resolved. Food and water will be provided to you at your request, within reason.
With that, he gave me a gentle shove and closed my own front door in my face. I reacted poorly. I screamed insults, slurs at the man outside, and everyone I imagined could possibly be in earshot. My voice probably carried through the entire complex, though it was unlikely many people had stayed behind long enough to hear. When yelling didn't work, I resorted to violence, pounding and bashing on the door as if I was being held closed from the outside, which, in a manner of speaking, it was. That option became close to me when I slumped to the floor, exhausted and defeated. I felt as I was going to die in my apartment, killed by the very people who were supposed to be protecting me. If only they let me stay under the lake a little longer, I could feel the satisfaction approaching. It was within my arm's grasp when I was removed. There was no substitute for it. The lake was the only large enough to help me. I wanted. I waited there on the floor for hours, saving my strength, waiting for the right moment to make my move. It wouldn't do to be found out too early and have the situation escalate into a personal bodyguard, or more likely, mandatory relocation to somewhere with padded walls and straps and locks. Just until I was myself again. Just until I was safe. Fuck that. They just didn't understand. Knuckles white, fingernails digging into my palms. I pushed myself past midnight. It had to be utterly dark out. I was only going to get one chance at this. I stared desperately at my digital clock, and as soon as it struck 1, I made my move. The sliding glass door led to my balcony was, thank God, the most well-designed door I had ever had in my life. It slid open like a dream every time, without so much as a squeak. Never before had I been so appreciative of master craftsmanship as when I closed it silently behind me, tiptoeing out across my balcony. Next were the rails, slated. The gaps between were much too narrow to squeeze through, even for someone with my slighter frame. Would have to go over, and that meant adding another few feet to an already intimidating drop. Getting to the position of sitting on the rail, legs dangling over the edge, was easy. I then rolled over, gripping the edge tight with my fingers and slowly easing myself down to a fully stretched out position. From there, I planned I would slowly lower myself to the bottom of the rail, cutting my drop by just that much more distance. That was my plan anyway. As soon as I let go at one hand, the other quickly followed suit, and I plummeted straight down, hitting the slope below at a gentler angle than I had imagined. Suppressing a yell, I curled into a ball at best. I could, while rolling down the hill, crunching and snapping through dried leaves and branches, the sounds reminding me of my own dehydrated state. Salvation was only yards away. On my hands and knees, I crawled towards the lake, scanning for the patrolling guards. They weren't hard to spot. They swept the area with flashlights, moving back and forth as they always had. One of the beams settled on a spot a few feet to my left, doubtlessly having heard any rapid descent. I scurried towards the tree to my right, pressed my back against it, letting out my breath in a long, slow exhalation. I was so close. Half a minute passed before the patrol got bored or off schedule, or both, and moved on. Just as I was about to get up and make a break for it, a voice startled me so much I almost let out a yelp of surprise.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Sitting in front of me in the brush, having appeared as quickly and silently as ever, was him, the dry man. He sat bow-legged, his fishing cap tilted forward to obscure his eyes, but certainly looking into mine nonetheless. Despite my ravenous thirst, I stayed frozen where I was, watching him, waiting for him to continue.
I envy you, with that stunt you pulled earlier. You got to feel it and live. Few people can say that, I tell you.
When I opened my mouth to speak, my voice came out as a rattle. You are the dry man. He chuckled, that horrible laugh of his that sounded like an old man choking on a piece of dry chicken.
No,
he said, waving the idea away with his hand.
I'm not him. I'm just one of his disciples, I suppose. And now, so are you.
I frowned. What are you talking about? It felt strange to be having a conversation with a supernatural horror, but the past few days had been anything but ordinary for me. I was willing to give this a pass.
You listened to my story through the walls, didn't you? I couldn't be sure until you took a dip today. They say it's the best feeling in the world.
Nothing better. I agree.
I felt it too. At least a shade of it. That's when I knew you must have been eavesdropping. Must have heard it same as the other poor woman.
The dry man looked almost sorrowfully, his dried lips drawn into a deep frown. You knew what telling her that story would make her do.
I did.
He confessed.
But don't talk to me like you're any different. Here you are, trying to run off to die.
Taken aback, I shook my head. No, I'm not. I don't want to die. I just need a drink. The dry man sighed. If he was half as dehydrated as I was, and his appearance suggested he was much more so. The action must have been hell in his throat.
Look, I've never done this before, so forgive me if I forget to mention something I should have. But you and I, we're the same now.
That's impossible. I never tortured hell. I'm not a century old. I remember the details of the story all too vividly, even days later. Another wheezing chuckle.
Neither am I. I told you. I ain't the dry man. I'm just a dry man. Now, same as you.
He held up a finger to silence me before I could interrupt.
You and I play by the same rules. We can't have water anymore. Not a drop. Or it sends us into a frenzy. You're likely feeling that now, I imagine.
I was.
You have some water, and it only makes things worse. You gotta have more. And before you know it, you're finding a big basin and dunking your head in, holding it there till you can't hold nothing anymore. You understand me?
What? What am I supposed to do?
Spread the word. Tell the tale of the dry man, and those who hear it will feed your thirst. The water they drink nourishes you. Like I said, the stunt you pulled today sent me right as rain for a good long while. It's why I'm willing to do you this favor.
I stared at him at Agus. So you murder people just so you can get something to drink? A sorrowful look returned to his face, and he slowly got to his feet.
Morals have to take a back seat to reality sometimes, kid.
He finally said before looking across the lake.
Some days there's nothing I'd like more than to just dive right in and feel it one last time. Embrace the end of a miserable existence.
I watched him look at the lake for a long, silent moment, finally breaking it with, "But you don't."
But I don't.
The man in the flannel sure conceded.
And neither, I'm betting, will you.
He then left me alone in the water, by the water. The next morning, they found every single patrolman face down in Ambassador Lake. Mandatory evacuation was ignited on shady wood apartments, as well as a manhunt for a certain resident who had gone missing in the night after eluding supervision. So sorry what I've done. You know the rules now, and some of you will survive. Some of you will become me, but I don't think all of you will. Some of you won't believe, others just won't have it in them. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you understand. If you don't yet, you will soon.
Dry Man was written by Steal My Pants and performed by Michael Stephen Bors II, Ken Samsel, Sinister Sweetheart, Winterbeat, and Jack Sanders.